These child stars weren't discovered by chance. They were the result of secret breeding programs designed to create the perfect Hollywood performers, combining specific genetic traits to manufacture stars who could control and manipulate audiences. Judy Garland, the pill packs, and the MGM machine. No star was a more tragic product than Judy Garland. She was forced to consume this mixture for years, beginning in her early adolescence. The woman who would become one of the most beloved and yet most tragic figures in cinema. Her identity was manufactured by the formidable Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer studio. MGM, under the iron fist of Louis B. Mayer, saw in the young singer not a child to be nurtured, but a workhorse to be controlled, and a commodity to be consumed by an adoring public. The primary tool of this control was a brutal combination of pills and punishing work schedules, a regimen that effectively damaged her ability to live a normal life before she was out of her teens. To manage her weight and suppress her appetite, a constant source of anxiety for the studio bosses, she was given medication to stimulate her activity, which are stimulant compounds. And to force her to sleep after the stimulant medication wore off, she was given medication to sedate her, sedative compounds. This cocktail, supplied by the studio and often referred to as speedballs, became the foundation of her lifelong reliance on chemical substances. This tragic reliance on chemical substances was compounded by a work schedule that was nothing short of criminal for a growing child. She would routinely work 18-hour days, sometimes collapsing on set from sheer exhaustion. Louis B. Mayer would often bring her into his office to weep openly, telling her she was ugly, then immediately stating she was the greatest talent in the world, a manipulation designed to keep her emotionally dependent on the studio's approval. Her own mother, Ethel, played a heartbreaking role in this exploitation, driven by her own ambition and the desperate financial situation of the family. Instead of protecting her daughter, Ethel often administered the pills, enabling the studio's destructive program. The cruel irony was that her vulnerability on screen, which made her so relatable to audiences, was a direct consequence of her manipulation off-screen. The studio system needed her to remain a youthful, innocent commodity, and any sign of maturing, physically or emotionally, was chemically suppressed. Mayer famously called her "my little hunchback" and made cruel comments about her appearance, reinforcing the insecurity that drove her dependency on the studio for validation. The emotional trauma was so pervasive that Judy later described her life at MGM as being treated like a piece of merchandise, not a human being. The erasure of Frances Gumm, the ordinary little girl, and the creation of Judy Garland, the tireless, vibrant, yet fragile performer, was complete. Her voice, unique and powerful, became the very symbol of Hollywood magic. Yet the cost of maintaining that magic was her mental well-being. Even the famous nervousness and reliance on the phrase "gosh" were seen by directors as indicators of her perfect, manufactured innocence, masking the severe internal trauma. This relentless psychological and chemical abuse became the unseen co-star in every one of her films, a truth that makes her joyous performances all the more difficult to watch in retrospect. The tragedy of her later years, the financial ruin, the instability, the repeated failed marriages, stemmed directly from this chemically induced, emotionally stunted childhood. The studio engineered the perfect star, but in the process, they destroyed the woman. Judy Garland's story is the most profound example of the studio system manufacturing genius at the cost of humanity. The studio engineered her destruction, and this high-stakes control over a child's fate was a common thread woven through the era, one that includes the financial exploitation that led to the Kugan Act, the psychological damage inflicted on Natalie Wood, and the shocking disposability of Disney's first boy star, Bobby Driscoll. Let's start with the definitive symbol of perfection, Shirley Temple. Shirley Temple, the perfect $15 million doll. The definitive symbol of Hollywood's ability to perfectly package and market a child star was, of course, Shirley Temple. Where Judy Garland's life was a desperate, chaotic fight for survival. Shirley Temple's existence was a study in precision, a flawless machine engineered to radiate optimism and innocence. She was the biggest box office draw in the world, single-handedly saving 20th Century Fox from financial disaster. She was, quite literally, a $15 million doll. The manufacturing process for Temple began at an almost impossibly young age. Her mother, Gertrude Temple, was the chief engineer of this star-making machine. Every aspect of Shirley's image was meticulously controlled, down to the 56 perfect corkscrew curls that became her signature. This image was so carefully maintained that when she had a slight injury, her publicists invented the fiction that she was home with a minor illness, ensuring the illusion of perfection was never broken. The story that her dimples were created by her mother pressing her cheeks in infancy, though possibly apocryphal, illustrates the pervasive sense that nothing about Shirley was left to chance. Her days were a rigorous, exhausting schedule of filming, dancing lessons, voice coaching, and fittings. Unlike many child stars who were spoiled, Shirley was raised with immense discipline and professionalism, instilled by a mother determined to maintain the perfect, profitable public persona. The studio used a form of corporal punishment to enforce compliance during long takes, an unimaginable act today. Her professional behavior was legendary. She could execute complex song and dance numbers in a single take, a testament to the intense, almost relentless coaching she received at home and on set. Her mother even coached her meticulously on how to interact with the press, ensuring every answer reinforced the wholesome, manufactured identity. The brilliance of the Temple machine was that the immense pressure she faced never showed on screen. She remained the sunshine girl the public needed her to be. Her very presence became an economic force and a psychological refuge for a nation reeling from financial catastrophe. President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously credited her with boosting national morale, saying, "When the spirit of the people is lower than in the Depression, it is a splendid thing that for just 15 cents they can go to a movie and look at the smiling face of a baby and forget their troubles." This immense social pressure rested squarely on the shoulders of a child, barely out of the toddler stage. The public adored her innocence, never questioning the fact that this polished, perfect performer was a product of relentless training and control. The moment her image began to waver, however, the public's acceptance began to crumble. By the time she was a teenager, her manufactured innocence was no longer profitable, and the public quickly turned away, illustrating the brutal lesson that Hollywood only loves the product, not the person. The fact that she transitioned successfully to a career in diplomacy later in life speaks volumes about the ironclad discipline that was forged in the fire of the studio system, but the initial cost was the loss of a carefree childhood. She often referred to her former self as it, signifying the profound detachment she felt from her manufactured persona. The relentless scrutiny of her maturing body and the public's refusal to accept her as a young woman ultimately drove her from the screen, a clear consequence of the manufactured perfection she could no longer sustain. Her story, while containing less tragedy than Garland's, nonetheless highlights the immense control and conditioning required to create a commodity of such perfection, a conditioning that directly led to the bitter financial lessons learned by the next great child star. Jackie Kugan, the man who legally owned his own child. The staggering fortunes earned by stars like Shirley Temple, and the system that allowed studios and managers to control those fortunes, found their most heartbreaking casualty in Jackie Kugan, a talented actor whose life led to a major legal reform. Kugan was one of the very first child superstars, famous for his soulful performance alongside Charlie Chaplin in The Kid in 1921. His tear-jerking performances and immense appeal allowed him to earn an unprecedented fortune for the era, an estimated $4 million from his films and merchandising, an amount equivalent to tens of millions of dollars today. This child, whose face was known worldwide, was literally bred for financial success, a true golden goose for his guardians. But the family structure surrounding him was built not on protection, but on relentless extraction. The immense flow of cash surrounding Kugan created a false reality for his parents. His father managed his career and controlled every contract, while his mother spent lavishly, believing the money was the family's shared property, earned by all through their collective effort. When Jackie came of age in the 1930s and asked for the money he had earned, he discovered a horrifying truth. It was all gone. His mother and stepfather had legally spent every cent, claiming that because no laws existed to protect a minor's earnings, the money belonged to them as his legal guardians. His mother famously told him he had earned his money by being a good boy, and that a good boy didn't need to be paid for his obedience. The legal justification was that since his father was responsible for his basic necessities, food, shelter, and clothing, the professional earnings were, by law, the property of the guardian. Jackie's legal battles made front-page news across the nation, revealing the utter lack of protection afforded to child performers who were essentially slaves to their contracts and guardians. The trial was a sensation, exposing the dark underbelly of the studio system and the predatory nature of many family managers. Kugan's plight shocked the public because it involved Chaplin's beloved kid being cheated by his own kin, shattering the era's idealized view of family. The ensuing public outrage was enormous, galvanizing public opinion against this predatory system. The financial chasm that opened up when he tried to reclaim his earnings led him to an extended period of bankruptcy and professional struggle, highlighting how completely dependent he was on his own wealth. Jackie ultimately received only a fraction of his earnings, around $125,000, but his painful experience was not in vain. It led directly to the passing of the California Child Actors Bill in 1939, better known as the Kugan Act. This legislative victory, born from his personal loss, finally provided legal safeguards, ensuring that a portion of a child performer's wages would be protected in trust for their future, fundamentally changing the industry for every child star who followed. This landmark legislation mandated that a portion of a child actor's earnings be set aside in a trust fund, protecting their future from greedy parents or managers. Kugan's tragic fate, though personal, ultimately served as a form of redemption, forcing the government to acknowledge the legal vulnerability of every child bred for the cameras. Though the act came too late for Jackie, his life serves as a stark warning about the consequences of breeding a child simply for financial return, a lesson that resonated deeply with the next star, whose tragedy was caused by a very different form of parental manipulation. Natalie Wood, the mother who sold a child's soul. The manufacturing of a star was not always about money. Sometimes it was about a parent's deep-seated, painful ambition, a drive that often superseded the child's well-being. No story better exemplifies this psychological cost than that of Natalie Wood. Born Natalia Nikolaevna Zakharenko, the 4-year-old was thrust into Hollywood by her formidable, controlling Russian mother, Maria Gurdin. Maria was determined to make her daughter a star, a relentless ambition that proved to be the single most defining and ultimately destructive force in Natalie's life. Maria Gurdin was a classic stage mother, using a terrifying cocktail of emotional manipulation, superstition, and iron will to keep her daughter on the path to stardom. One infamous incident involved a film set where Maria allegedly convinced Natalie that a piece of her clothing was cursed, and that if she didn't obey the director and perform perfectly, her mother would suffer. This kind of psychological pressure was constant. Maria's control was so complete that she often made Natalie feel she was performing not for a career, but for her very right to exist and be loved. Maria would constantly warn Natalie about the wolves waiting to take her place in Hollywood, instilling a deep, crippling fear of failure that motivated her to work tirelessly, but simultaneously eroded her self-worth. The price Natalie paid for this relentless push was enormous: crippling insecurity, a troubled transition from child to adult actress, and a lifelong dependence on destructive relationships. She was forever wrestling with the identity Maria and the studio had created for her. The star often sought psychiatric treatment to deal with the intense emotional damage inflicted by her mother's actions, carrying the wounds of her manufactured childhood deep into her adult life. In her later memoir, Natalie described her mother as a puppeteer, detailing how every relationship and personal choice she made was ultimately traceable back to her mother's relentless, controlling ambition. This feeling of being constantly manipulated never truly left her. Natalie Wood became one of the biggest actresses of her generation, beloved in films like Miracle on 34th Street and Rebel Without a Cause. But she remained a deeply fragile, uncertain woman who never truly found peace or ownership of her own life. Her story remains the most profound illustration of how the star-making machinery could break a child's spirit, even while building her a magnificent career. Her famous emotional intensity on screen was perhaps not acting at all, but a genuine expression of the internal turmoil created by her mother's lifelong psychological conditioning. The true cost of Natalie Wood's magnificent career was her peace of mind. She often felt tremendous guilt and sadness that the family's financial security depended entirely on her ability to perform, robbing her of the chance to simply be a daughter. The pressure led to a pattern of self-destructive behavior and a lifelong battle with anxiety that Hollywood's glamour could never cure. The public, viewing her as the quintessential American girl, never grasped the extent of the private battle she waged to simply exist outside the elaborate, fragile box her mother and the studio had constructed. To continue supporting the deep dive into these forgotten histories and the complex human beings behind the glamour, please consider subscribing to Golden Age Files. The next story, however, is a remarkable contrast. A child star who was perhaps the best managed and most profitable asset in studio history, whose career was a controlled evolution rather than an outright tragedy. Elizabeth Taylor, from MGM mascot to world's most expensive asset. Elizabeth Taylor was perhaps the only child star of her generation who was successfully and profitably re-engineered for adult stardom without the complete collapse that befell her peers. The reason was simple. Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer saw her as a blue-chip stock, an investment so valuable they protected and curated her transition with unparalleled foresight and resources. Taylor was effectively an MGM mascot from the age of 10, after her career took off with National Velvet in 1944. Unlike Judy Garland, who was treated like a workhorse, Elizabeth Taylor was treated like a piece of rare jewelry. The studio was keenly aware that the transition from a cute child to a glamorous woman was the great professional hurdle. They took extraordinary measures to ensure her image was always flawless and appropriate to her age, essentially micromanaging her adolescence. MGM had strict rules regarding her dating life, ensuring she was only seen in public with approved, wholesome young men who maintained the image of innocence. When she became a teenager, they carefully curated her dates, her friendships, and her public appearances, framing every milestone as a chapter in a fairy tale. She was the studio's crown jewel, and her persona was meticulously protected. The studio manufactured her first marriage to Conrad Hilton, using it as a major promotional event to signal her transition to womanhood, a clear business move rather than a personal choice. They controlled her introduction into the adult world of glamour, ensuring that every role, every gown, and every man she was seen with amplified her beauty and growing sophistication. Every step was designed to convince the audience that their little girl had matured into a queen, deserving of the most glamorous lifestyle Hollywood could offer. The relentless control meant she never had a truly private life, but unlike Garland or Wood, she learned to use the control to her advantage, eventually becoming one of the most powerful women in Hollywood. Her adult career, marked by record-breaking salaries and massive box office success, was a direct payoff on MGM's initial calculated investment in her childhood. This careful control allowed her to develop a fierce independence that ultimately enabled her to dismantle the studio system's authority over her life. She was the first major star to successfully demand $1 million for a single role for Cleopatra, proving she had mastered the valuation game the studio taught her. She successfully transitioned from the little girl on the farm to the world's most expensive asset, maintaining an iron grip on her celebrity long after the studio system crumbled. Her famous string of high-profile relationships, while often scandalous, were perhaps a final, dramatic attempt to control her own narrative outside the boundaries MGM had originally defined for her. The studio spent years training the public to accept her as royalty, a position she fully embraced and leveraged for personal and professional power once she reached adulthood. But while Taylor's trajectory was one of profitable control, the next star's success was powered by simple, brutal overwork. Mickey Rooney, the studio's perpetual motion machine. Mickey Rooney didn't just work. He generated so much revenue that MGM nicknamed him the Bank. Transitioning from the highly polished image of Elizabeth Taylor, we look at Mickey Rooney, a child star whose success was built not on careful grooming, but on sheer, exhausting, perpetual motion. Rooney defined the term workhorse, spending his formative years not in school or play, but churning out films at a frenetic pace that today seems impossible to comprehend. He was, quite simply, the studio's perpetual motion machine. His primary role at MGM was playing the quintessential all-American teenager, Andy Hardy, a role he inhabited for 15 films. For a period in the late 1930s and early 1940s, he was the top box office draw in America, beating even Clark Gable. The relentless schedule demanded that he work non-stop, often filming 2 or 3 movies simultaneously, along with constant appearances and promotion. His work ethic was so intense that he reportedly spent most of his downtime on set trying to memorize lines for the next picture he was scheduled to begin, allowing no time for rest or schooling. This relentless grind was physically and emotionally exhausting, depriving him of a normal childhood entirely. The studio exploited his natural energy and talent, pushing him past any reasonable human limit because he was a massive revenue generator. His salary, though substantial, never seemed to keep pace with the studio's profits or his own adult spending, leading to severe financial instability later in life. This intensity led to deep personal instability. The contrast between the cheerful, moralizing Andy Hardy on screen and the private life of Mickey Rooney was enormous. His private life was quickly characterized by financial instability, impulsive marriages, and persistent career struggles once he aged out of his child roles. The studio fostered a kind of permanent juvenile identity, making his transition to adult roles exceptionally difficult once the physical changes of adulthood robbed him of his youthful appeal. The public couldn't accept the boy wonder growing up, and the studio offered him no path forward. Rooney carried the scars of his lost childhood for the rest of his life, often expressing profound unhappiness about the exploitation he endured. The pressure to maintain the Andy Hardy persona in public was so intense that it masked the deep-seated identity crisis and financial desperation that plagued his adult years. His story is a powerful illustration of the industry's capacity to burn out talent. They did not just manufacture his image. They manufactured his exhaustion and, ultimately, his private chaos, all in the name of box office receipts. Rooney's entire adolescence was sacrificed on the altar of Hollywood's relentless demand for youthful content, leaving him unprepared and vulnerable when the curtain finally dropped on his childhood fame. The same desperation to control and profit from a child's talent led another major studio to create a star who would ultimately use her fame to walk away completely. Deanna Durbin, the voice programmed for success. Universal Studios often struggling against the financial might of MGM, desperately needed a star to anchor their finances. They found their answer in Deanna Durbin, whose voice and wholesome, slightly mischievous charm were deemed the perfect, reliable formula for success. Durbin was literally designed to be the opposite of the sultry screen sirens of the era. She was the girl next door, the moral center, the personification of youthful purity. The controlled image worked so well that she became known as the savior of Universal, single-handedly rescuing the studio from bankruptcy with her string of hugely popular musical films in the late 1930s. Durbin was fiercely guarded by the studio, who curated her image to ensure she remained untouched by any hint of scandal or adult behavior. Her publicists diligently managed her fan mail, removing any letters or gifts that seemed too mature or suggested anything outside her sweetheart persona. Every costume, every film plot, and every interview was vetted to preserve her lucrative innocence. The public adored her, seeing in her a hopeful antidote to the darkening world events. Her films were characterized by lighthearted plots and beautiful singing, offering pure escapism during times of global conflict. She was essentially a living, breathing tonic for the weary American spirit. But behind the scenes, Durbin harbored a fierce independence. She grew increasingly resentful of the manufactured personality and the suffocating control over her life. She was an accomplished artist who felt constrained by the sweet, predictable roles the studio insisted upon. She began refusing roles that she felt diminished her talent or kept her trapped in the perpetual innocence of her teenage image, often resulting in tense standoffs with studio executives who saw only the lost profit. Unlike most stars who clung desperately to their fame, Durbin made a radical and permanent choice. At the height of her success in her late 20s, she abruptly walked away from Hollywood. Her final, clear-eyed decision was to prioritize anonymity and a quiet family life over the suffocating golden chains of celebrity. She retired completely, moving to France, where she refused to give interviews or participate in any aspect of the fame machine that had consumed her youth. Her act was a powerful rejection of the control Hollywood exercised, a statement that she would rather have her private peace than her public persona. She felt her true identity had been entirely subsumed by the profitable Deanna Durbin brand, and she chose to reclaim her life outside of the manufactured spotlight forever. Her sudden retirement sent shockwaves through the industry, proving that fame could, in fact, be rejected. The story of Deanna Durbin shows that sometimes the ultimate success of a manufactured product is its ability to choose its own obsolescence. Conversely, the next story shows the brutal consequence of being discarded when the studio decided a child's image had passed its shelf life. Bobby Driscoll, Disney's first live-action casualty. The brutality of the Hollywood system, which builds a child up only to tear them down when they are no longer marketable, is nowhere more evident than in the tragic story of Bobby Driscoll. Driscoll was the perfect boy next door for the Walt Disney Company, becoming their first major live-action child star. He won a Special Academy Award for his work in the late 1940s, and his status was cemented when he was cast as the voice and model for the title role in the animated classic, Peter Pan. Driscoll was Hollywood's idea of a perfect, innocent product. However, the industry's loyalty was only as deep as the child's marketability. When Driscoll entered his teenage years, the studio, fearing the onset of acne and the inevitable changes of puberty, abruptly terminated his contract after his performance in Peter Pan was complete. He was, at the peak of his fame, summarily dismissed because he was no longer the perfect product. The lack of support and transition planning was intentional. Studios often preferred to simply cut ties with maturing children rather than invest in their complicated transition to adult performers, viewing the process as too risky. The shock of this abrupt cancellation, coupled with the lack of preparation for a normal life, proved devastating. He struggled with substance abuse issues, and his life spiraled into financial ruin and poverty, a tragic descent from his early success. The contrast between his former life, where he earned massive wealth and won an Oscar, and his subsequent reality of working low-wage jobs and living in extreme poverty created an unsustainable psychological burden. The final heartbreaking chapter of his life occurred in 1968, when he was discovered deceased in a derelict tenement building in New York City, his body unclaimed for weeks until fingerprint matching identified him. Disney's first live-action casualty was ultimately given a pauper's burial in an anonymous grave, a shocking and permanent symbol of how quickly a child star can become disposable. His fate became a cautionary tale whispered among Hollywood insiders, a grim testament to the industry's cold indifference once the youthful face of innocence could no longer be maintained. The boy who brought Peter Pan's voice to life ultimately suffered the opposite fate of the eternal boy, falling to earth with a tragic finality. This profound fall from grace remains one of the darkest reminders that, within the studio system, a child's worth was purely transactional, measured only by their ability to generate a profit, not by their humanity or their talent. His story forces us to confront the fact that Disney, the ultimate purveyor of childhood fantasy, was also capable of the most brutal professional calculation. Freddie Bartholomew, the child whose life was a lawsuit. While Disney simply discarded Bobby Driscoll, other parents sought to own their children financially for life. Returning to the theme of financial exploitation, few stars were more directly a prisoner of success than Freddie Bartholomew. Born in London in 1924, he was brought to America and found immediate fame in the mid-1930s in films like David Copperfield and Little Lord Fauntleroy. His success was staggering, making him one of the highest-paid actors of the decade, earning up to $2,500 a week, a monumental sum at the time. The issue was not the studio, but his own family structure. He was raised by his aunt, Sissy, who acted as his guardian and manager. When the financial success began, his estranged birth parents suddenly appeared, initiating a brutal, highly publicized custody battle that revolved almost entirely around controlling Freddie's massive earnings. His mother and father argued in court that Sissy, as a mere aunt, had no legal right to his income, attempting to claim the enormous wealth he generated while simultaneously showing little interest in his welfare. The legal fight dragged on for years, robbing Freddie of his childhood and reinforcing the feeling that he was not a person, but a valuable property to be fought over. He later described the experience of being constantly shuffled between lawyers and courtrooms as deeply dehumanizing. The custody battles ultimately exhausted most of his fortune in legal fees. By the time the legal dust settled and he regained control of his life, only a small fraction of his once massive fortune remained, having been consumed by the very relatives who claimed to love him. The emotional toll was immense, leaving him disillusioned with Hollywood. His story tragically illustrates how easily a family could become a financial predator, turning the child's talent into a lifelong source of anxiety. The feeling of being owned followed him throughout his career, making it difficult for him to trust those around him, as his own family had proven the most immediate threat. Despite the fact that his fame provided opportunities, it also shackled him to a legal and familial system built on greed. He eventually left Hollywood to pursue a quieter career in television directing, seeking anonymity, far from the glare of the relentless publicity that had fueled his family's greed. The irony was that the Kugan Act, passed to protect his peers, arrived too late to save his own fortune from being devoured by legal fees. His legal ordeal became a painful public spectacle, showing the nation the dark truth that familial ties offered no guarantee against Hollywood greed. As we explore the final stages of the breeding program, we want to hear from you. What Golden Age topic, star, or scandal would you like Golden Age Files to investigate next? Tell us in the comments below, and let's continue to illuminate Hollywood's hidden history. Now we turn to the next strategic move employed by studios, creating a star as a specific countermeasure to an existing idol. Jane Withers, the Little Hellion studio plot. Hollywood did not simply create stars in a vacuum. They also engaged in strategic marketing warfare. When Shirley Temple was the queen of the box office, 20th Century Fox decided to create an antidote to her perfect sweetness in the form of Jane Withers. Withers was intentionally engineered and marketed as the Little Hellion, the naughty, sassy, and relatable alternative to Temple's immaculate perfection. This was a classic case of engineered opposition. Withers was an undeniably talented child actress, but her persona was amplified to be the energetic, scene-stealing foil. Her most famous early role involved a mischievous turn as the brat who tormented Shirley Temple's character. This persona was highly marketable, suggesting that the studio system was sophisticated enough to recognize the need for contrast and build an entire star around that specific market niche. Fox realized that American audiences, while loving Temple's saccharine charm, were also ready for a child who embodied mischief and rebellion, a calculated niche that Withers was perfectly cast to fill. The pressure on Withers was to always be on, to maintain this difficult, non-traditional persona in her public life, despite a more subdued personality off-screen. She was expected to live up to the image of the unruly child, a persona that created its own unique psychological challenges. Unlike the restrictive discipline imposed on Temple, Withers was encouraged to be loud, aggressive, and audacious, yet still within the strict constraints of the studio's carefully crafted script for her personality. Unlike Temple, who was meticulously controlled, Withers was encouraged to be loud and audacious, which came with its own set of burdens. She often had to suppress her natural desire to be quiet and reserved, performing the energetic Hellion role even when exhausted or unhappy, demonstrating a unique form of identity imprisonment. She was proof that Hollywood could manufacture success by deliberately breaking the existing mold, making her life an example of a calculated risk that paid off. The ultimate power of her persona was its relatability. She was the mischievous kid every adult secretly remembered being. Her ability to transition into an adult character actress was partly due to the fact that her image was already designed to be unconventional, unlike the strictly defined mold of Temple. Her manufactured sass became her superpower, allowing her to escape the trap of being a purely sweet commodity, securing her a longer, albeit complex, career trajectory. The story of manufactured stardom, however, extends beyond domestic talent, as demonstrated by the next child, who arrived in Hollywood as a wartime refugee. Roddy McDowall, the escapee from the London Blitz. The disruption of World War II brought a new, unusual form of talent acquisition to Hollywood: imported talent. Roddy McDowall was one such star, a child whose career began in England, but was effectively relocated and manufactured in Hollywood after he and his family fled the London Blitz. He arrived in America in 1940 and quickly landed his iconic role in the family drama How Green Was My Valley in 1941. For McDowall, the transition to Hollywood was not a slow process of discovery, but an immediate, immersive plunge into the system, necessitated by wartime urgency. The studios wasted no time in capitalizing on his talent and his dramatic backstory as an escapee from the London Blitz. His British accent and quiet dignity were highly valued, offering a sophisticated counterpoint to the more rambunctious American child stars. Despite the emotional turmoil of being a refugee, McDowall displayed an innate professionalism and resilience, skills that likely stemmed from his early career in the intense British system. Unlike many of his peers, McDowall learned to navigate the system successfully. He formed close, lifelong friendships with his fellow child actors, including Elizabeth Taylor, offering a small protective support network that helped shield him from some of the industry's harsher realities. After struggling during the awkward teenage years, He successfully transitioned out of child roles and into a long, successful career as a respected character actor, photographer, and activist. He was a survivor of the manufactured system, one of the few who found a quiet, dignified way to maintain a lifelong career after the initial childhood glow faded. His adaptability was his greatest asset. He shifted seamlessly between major Hollywood productions and acclaimed stage roles, proving his worth extended far beyond the initial, profitable child image. His success was based on adaptation, a skill the next actress could not master, leading to her quick, painful obsolescence. He maintained his connection to the era by becoming a respected film historian, preserving the legacy of the same system that had molded him. His early experience as a refugee gave him a unique perspective, enabling him to view the Hollywood system with a degree of critical distance. McDowell's quiet intelligence allowed him to observe and understand the mechanics of the studio system without being entirely consumed by its manufactured demands. Peggy Ann Garner, the Oscar winner who couldn't find a job. The industry's focus on the child star is often ruthless, demanding perfection, and then discarding the talent once the initial, profitable image is gone. Peggy Ann Garner exemplifies the cruel truth of the burnout star. Garner was a celebrated, gifted actress who achieved the pinnacle of early success, winning a special Juvenile Academy Award for her powerful, heartbreaking performance in A Tree Grows in Brooklyn in 1945. She was, for a moment, recognized as one of the most talented children in the world. However, her success proved to be a cruel curse. Hollywood had no patience for the awkward years. As Garner grew older, her film roles became scarcer. Studios, having bred her for youthful perfection, had no clear vision for her as a young woman. She struggled profoundly with the pressure of maintaining a career, often feeling dismissed by the age of 18 and unable to find consistent acting work. The press often highlighted her struggle, contrasting her former brilliance with her current lack of employment, compounding her professional humiliation. She battled profound disillusionment, finding herself typecast as the child star who could no longer transition. Her story highlights the extreme pressures placed upon female performers in particular, where the physical demands of the perfect product superseded any amount of talent. She spoke openly about the profound sense of loss that accompanied her transition, describing the sudden shift from being the center of attention on a major film set to being just another hopeful adult actress struggling for a small part. The industry that once celebrated her abandoned her when she was no longer commercially viable, leaving her to grapple with the emotional fallout of a brief, brilliant, and ultimately isolating early career. This rapid decline illustrated that for female child stars, the value lay in the age and the image, not the genuine raw acting skill that had won her the Oscar. She spent years trying to shed the child star label, a professional ghost that haunted her attempts at finding serious adult roles on stage and screen. The emotional cost of her early success left her feeling like a novelty item with an expiration date, unable to be appreciated as a serious actress. The public's intense demand for perpetual youth in its female stars became her ultimate professional undoing, condemning her to the difficult life of a former child prodigy. Her struggle to maintain a career contrasted sharply with the final star, whose very identity was a lifelong fabrication orchestrated by her mother. June Allyson, the mother who fabricated a childhood. Our final subject brings us back to the core theme of identity fabrication. June Allyson, the actress who became known as the Hollywood sweetheart. Allyson's massive success was built upon an image of complete, unblemished innocence, a wholesome, slightly scatterbrained charm that endeared her to millions. What audiences didn't know was that this persona was meticulously constructed by her mother to conceal a difficult, painful reality. June Allyson's childhood was far from the sunny, optimistic life her screen image suggested. It was marked by poverty, instability, and emotional strain. Her mother often struggled financially, and young Allyson herself suffered a serious injury as a child, resulting in a long, painful recovery, a world away from the carefree image she was forced to project. Her mother, desperate to secure a better life, became the architect of the fabricated innocence. She strictly controlled Allison's image, ensuring that her public persona never wavered from the sweet, non-threatening sweetheart. This created a profound split between the star and the woman. The famous little stutter she developed in childhood was carefully incorporated into her persona, making her seem more vulnerable and endearing, another piece of reality twisted for commercial gain. The star often experienced deep personal unhappiness and marital strife in her adult life, complexities that were always fiercely concealed by the star's handlers to protect the profitable public image. Any hint of darkness or complexity was immediately suppressed by the studio, which had a multi-million-dollar investment in her pure, innocent appeal. The June Allison the world adored was a beautiful, profitable lie. She confessed in her autobiography that she often felt tremendous pressure to keep up the charade, knowing that millions of dollars were dependent on her perpetual wholesomeness. This ultimate act of manufacturing a persona, hiding a difficult past with the creation of a perfect, profitable present, completes our journey into the ruthless reality of child stardom in the Golden Age. Her entire adult life became a high-wire act of maintaining this public facade, leading to deep resentment toward the industry that demanded her emotional truth be sacrificed for her commercial viability. She later admitted that the sweetheart persona was the greatest performance of her life, a beautiful mask that ultimately shielded her from forming genuine, trusting relationships. These 13 stories represent the heartbreaking cumulative cost of Hollywood's attempt to breed the perfect performers. For many of these stars, their childhoods were not a time of freedom and discovery, but a period of rigorous training, financial exploitation, and profound psychological control. We have seen the tragic prototype in Judy Garland, the financial martyr in Jackie Kugan, the psychological cost borne by Natalie Wood, and the brutal disposal of Bobby Driscoll. The children were treated as raw materials, commodities to be molded, polished, and sold for millions. The studio system, aided by overly ambitious parents, created an environment where the child's identity was secondary to the box office receipt. The pressure they faced, from medication to manage weight, to constant legal battles, to the threat of complete professional ruin, was immense and unforgiving. They were forced to perform in front of the camera, but their most difficult, enduring performance was the one they gave every day off camera, maintaining the illusion of the happy, perfect child. The secrets we have revealed do not diminish the artistry of these magnificent stars. If anything, knowing the immense, controlled environments from which their talent emerged deepens our appreciation for their human resilience and extraordinary dedication. They became icons, not because they were untouched by the world, but because they survived a machine designed to exploit them, channeling their trauma and exhaustion into performances that remain luminous today. They endured 18-hour days and were fed medication to stimulate their activity, to manage their images. Their enduring legacy is not just the films they left behind, but the Kugan Act and the greater awareness of the price of fame that their struggles ultimately brought about. The stars of the Golden Age shine no less brightly for having been revealed as complex, flawed human beings. Indeed, their complexity only adds to the brilliance of their achievements. The resilience of these stars, who fought the very machine that created them, remains truly astonishing. If their stories moved you, if they deepened your appreciation for the complex human beings behind the glamour, we ask for just a moment of your time. Please take a moment to hit the like button on this video and share it with fellow classic cinema enthusiasts. Your support allows us to continue celebrating the full, complicated, and often poignant humanity of the stars who built Hollywood's golden dreams. And if you haven't yet, be sure to subscribe to Golden Age Files. We promise to keep illuminating the untold stories and the authentic truths that lie beneath the silver screen. Until next time, we raise a glass to the legends who endured it all. Thank you for watching.